Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever been tilted by the game of chess? And upon that tilt, have you ever played some nonsense openings against people online, like just shuffling your pawns back and forth, moving your queen around, jumping your knights around the board, right? We all do it. I mean, we're all guilty of it. I've done it. But what happens when you sit down live over the board against Magnus Carlsen, the greatest player not just of this generation, but potentially of all time, and he plays a nonsense first move against you? Well, that's what happened to Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. It was a res day at the Candidates Tournament a few weeks ago in Spain, and they were playing a blitz event. And Magnus started with one knight a3, the sodium attack, and Daniel looked at him like, "We doing this? We about to square up, you and me, so I'm going to show you the game. Please disregard the workout bench." I was doing a stream earlier where every time I lost the game, I had to do 10 exercises. Naturally, I did a lot of exercises because I lost a lot of games. So, yeah, this is the game, and this is how it began. It began with move one, knight a3, and Daniel looked at his opponent like, "You for real right now? Like, really? Actually?" Magnus couldn't even look at Daniel. He was not even looking. He was looking that way. So funny. And this is a 3-minute game with 2-second bonus. Daniel responds with the most principled move, which is playing in the middle of the board. And now Magnus immediately attacks the pawn. So the funny thing is that this is a good move, but the computer is trying to suggest the move e4 by black. And this is just really funny. e4 prevents white from playing e4 himself, and also allows white to play d5. Allows black to play d5 and kind of go for this approach. This approach is also fine, but it's like we're playing e4, e5, but for some reason white's knight teleported to the wrong square. Like somehow it slid. There was black ice on the road, it was driving late night, and it slid to the c4 square. I don't know. Now we just have a normal game, and Daniel responds very principled. 2 knights, 2 pawns in the center. Every Russian schoolboy knows, that you got to play like this. E takes d5, queen d5, and by move 5, black has 3 pieces out, and white has 1. White also has a blocked light-squared bishop, and in many ways, white is giving black odds. The odds that white is giving to black is the fact that to trade off being Magnus Carlsen, you get more development. You get a bigger edge in development. But somehow the advantage always sort of slides, It's only 0.28 because, again, there's different ways that the computer would have handled this with black. Knight f3. Now, black here can finish developing with bishop c5, with bishop g4, potentially bishop e6, potentially, but Daniel forces the issue with the move e4 straight away. He's like, you know what? I'm going to trade off our center pawns, and I'm going to make Magnus look goofy for not, and Magnus obviously isn't going to lose the right to castle, so instead of that, he's going to have to play a move like knight e3, maybe attacking my queen, but no! Magnus takes the pawn. So Daniel, of course, Daniel didn't have to do this. Like, for example, if I was playing Daniel and I was white, Daniel wouldn't play the move e4. I firmly believe that. It's not a bad move. It's just that, Daniel's advantage in playing me is the fact that he's better in every way, shape, and form in chess. Maybe not in other things. I think I'm pretty good. My shoulder press is pretty good or something. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, he would keep more pieces on the board because tactically and all that, he would have the advantage. But by clearing off the queens and creating a totally symmetrical pawn structure, he takes the fun out of playing knight a3 because, folks, let's be honest, when someone starts the game like this against us, we can't lose. You ever have a person play the crab against you? You gotta respond with the crab. Because the truth is, at least now you have a built-in excuse for why you lost. Well, I don't study the crab. I mean, I watch Gotham every day, and he only recommends real openings. So naturally, I don't know what to do against bad ones, right? Because if you play seriously against the crab opening and then you get blown off the board, I mean, you feel dumb, right? So it makes sense what Daniel does here. He trades queens. He takes all the fun out of position. Now no one knows that Magnus played the sodium attack, right? Also, I'm threatening a fork, which is nice. So Magnus defends it with bishop 2e3. What black should do here is develop very quickly. And also, when you see a king in the middle, you want to castle with check. This is a very common thing to do. So that is why Daniel plays the move bishop e6. He also could have played bishop to g4. The idea of bishop to g4 might have been, for example, to damage the pawn structure. But this actually only helps white, as you can see from the eval bar, because black loses his bishop pair. Now he only has 1. White gets a bishop pair, a potentially open file here. No, not potentially. It is an open file. What I meant to say was potentially very useful open file. So instead of that, Daniel plays bishop to e6. This is not an attack on the knight because it is defended. That is obviously equal value, but it is just keeping the knight in the line of sight of the bishop. Magnus develops his own bishop that is actually also deceivingly not a threat on the knight because that bishop guards that knight. So if Black went here, they would just trade horses. That's not an attack for anybody. But both sides are developing and Daniel castles queenside. Now, if you're going to compare what's going on in this position, Black still has an advantage. Okay, how do you evaluate any position? How do you determine who has an advantage in the game of chess? A good start is by the first name. So if your name is Magnus and your last name happens to be Carlsen and not, Magnus like blah, 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 then yeah, like you probably have a little bit of an advantage. But let's just say like all names are equal. Well, it's material, which is equal in this case. King safety. It's not in White's favor. That king is desperately hoping that these pieces don't walk away from their job. And in terms of piece activity, right? I mean, Black has the advantage there as well. Space is kind of equal here because this pawn structure is very funny. Like all 12 pawns are just on their home squares, which is sort of interesting. So king c1, Magnus has to make yet another king move. And this is really the moment where Naroditsky has to take over the initiative. And it's really not easy to do that. Like if you let the machine run, I mean, it likes his next move. When you have a very symmetrical position like this and a slight advantage based on kind of very obscure principles like king safety, you want to make advantageous exchanges with moves like knight to c5. Where you're trying to take the bishop, because after something like this is a massive improvement for Black. You see the eval just went 2x. Like, look, it's like 0.6 here, and after a trade like this, it's now minus 1.2. That's because there is a very tangible threat. The bishop has improved, the rook is coming as well, and this is just a massive improvement to the white position. Whereas, what Magnus does is he does this. He doesn't trade anything. He tries to keep more pieces on the board, protect his king, doesn't give in to the demands of Naroditsky. Narrow here doesn't have a lot of choices. For example, he can play bishop e7 and try to develop his rook, but by then White will consolidate and maybe even exchange, right? He might trade this knight and then he might trade this knight, and like slowly Black has almost no advantage. The advantage is very obscure moves like a5 to get out of the way. I mean, a5 is hardly a way to get an advantage, right? So that is maybe something that White is hoping for. So knight e4, Daniel moves in, and Magnus, you see, he's trying to exchange the knights. He takes. I mean, Daniel takes, because the truth is that if you don't take, you go backwards. I don't know what we're doing here. We're sort of dancing. You're giving White time to consolidate. So we have this exchange. Now, Black is still very, very comfortably better. That doesn't really say a whole lot, considering the game began with this move, right? So Daniel is doing his best here, but at some point, Magnus might take over the initiative, right? So we have knight to d4, bishop to d3. And now we have a weird moment. Daniel spends a long time here, and he can just, again, bring his bishop, bring the rook. I don't really know why he didn't do this. I feel like a little bit of it is that you're playing Magnus. I just feel like when you play really good players, there's like a weird like fairy dust that comes off of them in the air. And I mean, Daniel's an exceptional player, but for example, if I was playing Daniel, I would feel that dust, on my face. Is what I'm saying. I'm not saying he's like Sandy. I'm saying, you get what I'm saying. All right, you guys get what I'm saying. So I feel like they all make you do goofy stuff. And so here, Daniel played this move. And the first thing you'll notice is that the eval is almost completely equalized. And that's because of the following little sequence, okay? There is this move. Bishop takes d4, right? If this trade would have happened, Black would have been happy. And then if you go here, the bishop gets trapped. Don't let your bishops go off wandering like this because they will get locked away in king b7. All right, so you can't play like that. If we back up very briefly, bishop takes d4 removes the defender of that bishop, right? So Daniel calculated that there's this. He cannot take because of this. But he saw this move. And he probably thought if cd3, rook d4, this is obviously a better endgame for Black. The pawn is just weak, right? King is coming to c2, bishop is coming out, rook is going to double, etc. Here's the thing, though. White can take on a7. And Daniel might have thought, well, I'm going to go b6, trap the bishop. Yeah, but by the time you do that, you lose yours. And maybe Daniel also thought that he had something here. Like maybe he thought bishop c2, king c2, b6 to trap the bishop. But you don't have that. Because at the end of the day, count the pawns. White has 5 of them, right? So I don't exactly know what Daniel kind of misevaluated after bishop a7. Maybe he didn't misevaluate anything. Maybe Daniel looked at this position and thought, well, I'm threatening to trap the bishop. So he's got to move it, and then I get a big lead in development. So Daniel sacrifices a seemingly meaningless pawn, but now we're in a territory where white is a pawn up. So if Magnus is able to consolidate this successfully, he will win. He will just win because he's the GOAT of endgames. Now, let's just talk about piece imbalances. In a dream situation for black, when you look at endgames, you want to get these two bishops on the board and nobody else, okay? You want to have light squared versus dark squared bishop, trade off everything else, because there it doesn't matter that you're down a pawn. The second kind of an endgame where it might not matter is a bishop versus a knight, because a knight, I mean, it depends on how the pawn structure is set up, but the knight might not be able, it's kind of a slow-moving piece, and if you get to knight and pawn versus bishop, that's a pretty simple draw, I mean, depending on the position. You kind of want to avoid certain rook endgames, okay? I mean, some rook endgames are drawn, that's what they say, but you don't want to, so that's what Daniel's going to do, right? And you see what Daniel does? He immediately goes for the opposite colored bishops. So light squared bishop, dark squared bishop. Here's the problem. Magnus has both rooks on the board still. You'll notice that there's a reason that Magnus ends up not rushing into all these exchanges. He plays bishop to e3, and it's not really easy for black to make another move, right? He goes bishop e4, rook g1. Sometimes you have to play these passive, ugly moves, and Daniel is probably like, well, there's no way Magnus can win this. Like, he can't move any pieces. Can't do anything. Since he can't do anything, he can't beat me. I'm going to move rook here, rook d5. Like, my rooks are going to zig and zag, and his king is sort of just stuck. All right, b3. But now there's problems. So b3 has two ideas. Number one, you want to get your king out. You want to get the pawns moving, all right? Because the king is kind of weak. Number two, you are anticipating Daniel threatening you, and now you play rook a2. I mean, you play a bunch of ugly moves. You lose the right to castle. You play the sodium attack, for God's sake, right? And yet, you're still the one applying the pressure, okay? Now, here, there's an amazing move by black that can actually save the game. There's an amazing maneuver, and there's an amazing move, and Magnus missed it, because if he saw it, he wouldn't have played his move. And Daniel misses it as well. See if you can find it. Black to move, and play a very active move that will neutralize any sort of advantage that white has. See if you can find it. Give you a few seconds. You know how this goes. That move, folks, is the incredible rook d3. That is a jaw-dropping move. And the threat is to take the pawn, and you can't take or defend because you're pinned. And if I unpin myself, I walk into another pin. And if I unpin myself this way, suddenly the pressure is overwhelming on the c2 pawn. And that's it. All right, just rook dc3, and that's it. And rook d3 is just incredible. It's just lights out. It's a draw. Daniel, though, plays b6. All right? And the game continues, and now Magnus immediately plays c4. This is really nice because this is comfortable. The structure is not quite there, and you want to push your pawn majority where you have the 3 on 2, potentially trade, potentially simplify to just having a passed pawn there and opening up the lines for your pieces. So you see now Daniel sees rook d3 and tries to harass white, but white is super solid, okay? Now Magnus is advancing, right? He opens up that front of attack. Now he's located a target while also protecting the pawns and protecting his king. This entire blob of pawns is completely untouchable by black, okay? At some point, Magnus will play the move h4. There it is. Now, literally, this blob of pawns cannot be touched. They all defend each other, so Magnus is free with the completely safe king, the material advantage, and the superior activity and clear targets. Everything's turned around, right? So every criteria to judge a game is turned around, and that's why the advantage is only ballooning in white's favor. Rook d1, and of course, time. Time is also a thing. Daniel has like 25 seconds. Magnus stayed at about 1:20 for 20 moves. So rook a7. All right, we've identified a target. Now, Naroditsky, nice job here. Gets back, okay. And bishop f4 played, and bishop b7 defends. But of course, white can also, again, expand the majority, the 2-on-1. Because like I said, majorities are meant to be expanded, and you see when you actually that I have to be a little careful. So let me play like bishop f4, rook d7, and then c5, right? Otherwise there would have been rook b1 and rook b5. But like a position like this, the pawn majority is just storming in. You can use it to restrict the king. You can use it to simplify down into an endgame with a passed pawn. So there's a lot of different winning ways to handle the fact that you have like more pawns on a side of the board than another. So bishop f4 is played, bishop b7 back, And now Magnus does something really, really nice. So he plays a little maneuver here, which is like incredibly sophisticated. In endgames, you want to make your opponent weaken themselves to the maximum ability. Like, what you're about to see here is just super high level stuff. There's no other way to describe it. Like, you're not going to attack any pieces. Look at this move, Rook G5. Point of this move is to make black move. So you make black commit a pawn forward. Then you make black commit another pawn forward. You can't play bishop c6 because b4, b5 is fatal. So black now committed 2 more pawns forward and blocked in his own piece and created holes in the structure. So now the structure is going to have difficulty moving, and white can potentially play h5 in the future and even h6 to lock that pawn in, get to that pawn, and then promote. So very sophisticated maneuver. In general, if you can force opponent pawn moves like this, it's probably a good thing. And now we're infiltrating, right? The 7th rank has been cleared out. We have h5, rook a7, oh, sorry, king c3. And now we have rook a7, and it looks like you're defending, but again, look how every piece over here is on light squares, which means nobody is taking care of the dark squares, right? So here comes the king, all right? Now we have rook back to a3 defending, bishop e3 defends the pawns, the king keeps going. Look at that light squared bishop. I mean, this bishop blocked in by his own pawn and his own king. Nothing he can do, Daniel doing his best, and then a beautiful little maneuver here to bring the rook down the middle of the board. So the rook did its job on the side. Now we have the door open, sliding to the middle, infiltrating down the e-file. And this is actually a totally winning endgame because the bishop gets bullied to death. It's actually a very sad tale of the bishop being completely paralyzed. Look at this position. Look at this position. There is only one man on earth, as far as I am concerned, that can make Daniel Naroditsky resign and almost in 54 moves and restrict him to nearly 0 counterplay by playing move 1 knight a3. And it's this guy. It's his opponent. It's Magnus Carlsen. I mean, Daniel is one of the most dynamic, interesting players in the world. Like in 3-0 Blitz, especially online 3-0 Blitz, because I mean, over the board, they don't really play a whole lot of 3-0. They play a lot of 3-2. Online 3-0, Daniel's like top 5 Blitz player in the world. Magnus, that's not exaggerating. That's not exaggerating. 3-0, mouse skills, flagging skills, everything like that. Daniel's up there. 3-2 live is different. Increment time is a little bit different. Obviously, the edge starts going more to the super grandmasters who never have to worry about losing on time. But Daniel has a really fiery and aggressive playing style, right? And to play such a dubious opening against him, and then like just defend a mildly unpleasant position just long enough for him to make an inaccuracy, and then surgically, masterfully handle the pressure, deal with it. Of course, granted, there was rook d3 here, but that was an incredibly brilliant move. And then just he just goes forward, and it's like an unstoppable force. You just cannot prevent it. All right, everything that he does, it looks so easy. When Magnus plays, like I said, when Magnus plays, you don't ask questions. You just admire. You're like, oh wow, oh that's very nice. So knight a3. Magnus also played some goofy stuff against Anish later in the event, but actually Anish was able to beat him. I'm happy to share that game if you'd like, but figured I'd show this one. A little bit of disrespect, a little bit friendly amount of disrespect, but it pays off. Knight a3. So now you all have another weapon to add to your toolbox, because if Magnus can play it, it means it must be good for you as well. I'll see you in the next video, folks. Get out of here.